Welcome to another episode of Christian Combatives. I am your host and servant in Jesus Christ, Paladin Actual. Today, I want to ask the question, what if Goliath was short? Or at least, what if he wasn't a giant? This, hopefully, will be the start of a series that I like to call Christian Conspiracy Theories, where we investigate and look at different ideas and theories that aren't necessarily explicitly stated in Scripture, but either are plausible or just a cool idea if they were true. Without any further ado, let's get into it. What if Goliath was not 9 feet tall like we commonly believe? What if there's biblical reason to believe that he is in fact much shorter than that? I call this, of course, the Strawn hypothesis. So let's let him explain it in a video he was kind enough to record for us.
Okay, so the height of Goliath. Some have called it conspiracy theory. I resent that. It's actually just good scholarship, but hey, whatever. It basically boils down to a couple things. Now, if you look in your favorite ESV, you'll actually see in the footnotes in 1 Samuel when it describes Goliath's height, it says 6 cubits and a span. Now, if you don't know, this is a cubit from my elbow to my wrist about, and this is a span from my thumb to my pinky, like that. So 6 cubits and a span would put Goliath, there's a range of heights he could be, but about 9.5 feet tall. And that's really tall. And I understand why people want to read it as 6 cubits and a span, because you're like, oh, 9'6", that's pretty cool. That's pretty sweet. We like big guys. We like big guys that get beat by little guys because we're human beings. So 6 cubits in a span is supported by the Masoretic text as well as a couple others. Whereas 4 cubits in a span is supported by the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. What this is to say is, if you're not into biblical textual criticism, and that's fine, there's decent textual evidence for both. Now, I'm going to lean towards 4 cubits in a span, and now 4 cubits in a span is about 6'9" rather than 9'6". Okay, so 6'9", still very impressive. So people say, well, it's not 6'9" because that's like a regular human height that, like I could see somebody today walking around who's 6'9", so that's not that impressive to me. However, if you've seen a 6'9" person in person, it is still very impressive. Like, if you ever seen like LeBron James up close, I mean, it's an impressive thing. But also, when we take into account that the average height of people at this time is relatively small, and you might ask me how we might know such a thing, and it's actually really funny. We can find out this kind of thing by excavating door frames. And a lot of door frames we've found from this era of the Iron Age have been around a 5'5" to 6 feet tall. If you didn't know, the average door height in America is about 80 inches, and that's because most people aren't that tall. If you're going to make door frames, generally you do it for people who are much shorter than the frame. So if the tallest frames we can find are around 6 feet tall, that means the people aren't very tall. The estimates that people have is that the average is about 5 feet to 5'5" for a person in ancient Israel, with the tallest being maybe 5'8". Why is this important? Now, it's not just important just because Goliath is 6'9", and by comparison he's more of a giant, but also we have one other character in all of 1st and 2nd Samuel whose height is, well, 2 actually, but one that's relevant to this. Because the other is one of David's brothers. The only other character whose height is mentioned in the whole book is Saul. When Saul is introduced in the story, it says he is a head and shoulders above the tallest man in Israel. So if the tallest man in Israel, we're going to say, is about 5'8", head and shoulders, that's what, 10 inches? Means he's a good 10 inches taller than them, which means it would put him at about 6'6". All this is to say that he's in the same sort of height range as Goliath. Now, this to me is a much more interesting dichotomy in the story of David and Goliath that isn't there if you just read it as 9'6". It's just, well, that's a giant, right? But if you read it as 6'9" and know that Saul is 6'6", the reader then understands, well, wait, Saul should be fighting Goliath because Saul is probably a match for him. He's probably, he's the same height as him. And this is where we get David pictured as a little kid or whatever, because he puts on Saul's armor and it doesn't fit him. And it's like, oh, it's because he's a kid. He's little junior asparagus and the VeggieTales, and he doesn't fit in whatever the Archibald's armor or whatever. It's not that. It's not that David is small. I mean, he is, by current standards, maybe. He's kind of a short king. But He's not small by that standard. He's just not Saul, who's huge and has huge armor. So the dichotomy then becomes, well, why isn't Saul fighting David? And Saul fighting Goliath, sorry. It makes Saul a lot more pathetic and shameful in this story, which is, I think, pretty interesting, especially with the trajectory Saul's reign is going at this point in the book of Samuel. So that's the conspiracy theory of the height of Goliath. 6'9", 4 cubits in a span. At least by this, I'll call myself a scholar. By this scholar's estimation, rather than 9'6". I know we all wanted to be 9'6" because we wanted to be really tall, but literarily, it's much more rich if we've got Goliath at a nice 6'9".
So there you have it, the Strawn hypothesis of the height of Goliath. Now, in other such conspiracy theories, there's a lot of kind of extrapolation of, well, what if the text actually means this other thing? Or what if this thing that's not mentioned is actually another detail that we need in the story? In this case, however, he's actually not even making up a crazy hypothesis. What he's doing is he's quoting text from a different kind of ancient manuscript, which, I'll allow it. As a valid conspiracy theory, I'll allow it. There's a couple of interesting details that we find this throughout Scripture, where there's different aspects mentioned, or things are mentioned in slightly different ways in different manuscripts. For giggles, I decided to look up on Bible Hub just the ESV version to see what it says and see what the footnotes are for this. The ESV version of 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 4. If you go to again, BibleHub.com, it says in this, "And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." And it's got 2 footnotes here. It's got a footnote for 6 and it's got a footnote for cubits. Let me scroll down to the bottom. Hebrew. So 6 is what it says in the Hebrew, but it mentions the Septuagint, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Josephus mention 4. So this isn't just speculation. This is actually, you know what? In terms of credibility, I would say that this is about a 50-50 credibility. If we've got the Hebrew saying one thing and the Greek saying another thing, and you've got, it's not like the Septuagint is necessarily unreliable. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls of Septuagint, Josephus. These are pretty far up there in terms of if we want to compare manuscripts, we want to compare sources. So it's not like this is just some Gnostic gospel, some Gnostic text out there like the pseudepigrapha of James or something like that. But this is actually something that has some credibility, this source. So I would say, because we have, Hebrew sources saying this, 9 foot, and we have the Greek sources saying this, 6 foot, you know what? That's about 50-50. That's what so if I want to rank this in terms of, I'm going to rank this in 2 different categories. First, maybe I'll have a graph or something like this. I'll say terms of, let's say, believability, probability, plausibility. Plausibility, I'd say 5 out of 10, right? Just in the middle, just based on that alone. And how cool of a theory it is, I'll put that a different graph here. How cool of a theory this is, I'm going to put that up here as like an 8. I think this is actually a really cool theory. And in fact, I think that this makes so much sense textually. Again, if you understand this dichotomy of the people of Israel versus Goliath, I think that actually adds to the credibility. I think it actually makes more sense. There's 2 different stories there, essentially, based on this one difference of translation, this one difference in manuscript. There's essentially 2 different stories. In one story, you have this towering behemoth of a man, this Goliath, 9 foot, whatever. I have never seen a 9 foot tall guy in person. I've seen a few 6'8" people in person, a few 6'5" people. And if you see him stand next to people who are even 6 foot, even average sized people, they do look, it can be pretty intimidating. I looked it up. LeBron James is indeed the height of potentially Goliath. He's 6'8", 6'9", something like that. I think 6'9", according to the Googles. He's 6'9", and if you've ever, I'm trying to think of other people. Have you ever seen Brian Shaw? Of course, my kids love watching Eddie Hall and Brian Shaw slap each other around. But Brian Shaw, I believe, let me look this up real quick. I believe Brian Shaw is up there in height too. 6'8". So Brian Shaw is 6'8". He is a large fellow. If you've seen him standing next to normal people, I'll pull up an image of him standing next to bodybuilders. It's hilarious the difference in height. So 6'8", 6'9" is still pretty impressive in terms of, especially people who were sub 6 foot, the sub sixers who lived in Israel at the time. That still would be an impressive height, but it wouldn't be almost supernaturally so. 9 foot. That tells a different story. That would be a story of God basically overcoming a supernaturally strong, a supernaturally large enemy. A 9-foot tall Goliath tells a story of the little man David versus the big man, and God is the one who creates the victory. God is the one who gives the victory to David. Wonderful story. I'm all for it. It's a different story if Goliath is in fact only maybe a few inches taller than Saul. If Saul is over 6 foot, let's say 6'5", if Saul is 6'5" and Goliath is 6'8", Saul is basically the only one in the kingdom who is big enough to fight this dude. If you've ever seen any sort of combat sports, there is a reason you have weight classes. The taller you get, the longer your reach gets. A lot of times these bigger guys, they might put on more muscle. They might be bigger, stronger people. And it's really not fair. If somebody as big as like Brock Lesnar versus Bruce Lee, he would squish him and compact him into an even smaller object. So even still, this height difference would be intimidating. So the rest of the Israelites, pathetic 5-foot-somethingers that cannot possibly fight even a 6'8" guy. But Saul being the king of Israel, whose job it is to defend Israel against his attackers, by the way, chosen, anointed by God, specifically taller and bigger and stronger than everyone else. Remember the story of Saul. The Israelites were like, give us a king. Samuel was like, you don't want that. God tells you, God is your king. You don't want anything. They said, we want a king. We want a big, strong king. He's like, you know what? You're going to get what you want. And you're going to not be happy as a result of this. I promise this. And God still gives Samuel to give Saul to the people as their king. And they get this, Richard the lion-hearted, tall, head and shoulders above everybody else, strong, powerful guy. But he relies on his own strength. And the story of Saul is really tragic. I mean, it's self-imposed tragedy, but still, it's tragic in that he fails to trust God so many times. He makes up his own vows. He makes up his own rules. He doesn't rely on the strength of God. But here's the thing, is that God put him in his position. Even if Saul was 4'2", he should have gone against Goliath. It was his responsibility to fight Goliath. So the fact that David, this little shepherd boy, shows up, and Saul immediately abdicates his responsibility to defend the people of Israel to this youth, to this child, is shameful. Saul is a shameful character. He is a horrible example of a leader. In fact, he is an example of maybe one of the worst leaders. The emphasize the worst traits in leadership. He is a coward. He does not rely on God. He makes up his own rules. He makes up his own oaths. He makes up all of these things, and it's all about him, and he doesn't do his job. So the fact that Goliath was in his weight class and he still didn't fight him, if he was a 4'2" and Goliath was 9 foot tall, okay, you can understand the cowardice. But Saul is especially cowardly if Goliath was in his weight class and he did not fight him. And he throws his armor on a child and was like, go fight my battle for me. Oh man, that's a great theory. Because, I mean, again, the 9 foot tall behemoth that God destroys, underdog story, well, not even underdog story, because David doesn't kill Goliath. God kills Goliath through David. The fact that God defends his people even through the weak, that is a fantastic theme that is echoed throughout Scripture. But it's echoed throughout Scripture, so it's other places. But this additional embarrassment of Saul and this additional embarrassment of he should have been doing his duty, and God is the one who does the work through somebody weak. He shames those who are strong. That kind of makes a lot of sense. So because of that, I would say that in terms of believability, this is a little bit more than 50%. I would put this at a 6 out of 10 in terms of believability and an 8 out of 10 in terms of fun. Now, I myself am no stranger to exaggerated heights for the sake of telling a good story. But in this case, you know what? I'm going to absorb this into my belief system. Of course, not dogmatic. It's just interesting that this is an alternate possibility, an alternate text that actually suggests this thing directly. It's not so much of a stretch as just kind of making stuff out of thin air. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Do you think this is more or less? Scale of 10, believability. Scale of 10, how fun is this? How cool is this idea? Let me know. And also, if you've got any other theories that you'd like me to investigate, if you or your pastor has any theories, let me know. And if it's good enough, maybe I'll include it. I've got a lot of really cool ideas, and I would love to hear some more. God bless you, and take care.